The question of how transgender people were treated in prehistoric societies leads us into a world without writing, nations, or formal laws. A time when understanding human identity depended on daily survival, spirituality, and community roles. Though the term transgender is relatively modern, human gender diversity is not. Studying the lives of transgender or gender-nonconforming individuals from prehistoric times is difficult. There are no written records from the Paleolithic, Neolithic, or even early Bronze Age to tell us what people thought or felt. Instead, researchers rely on archaeological discoveries, burial customs, anthropological comparisons, and DNA analysis to uncover clues about how early humans might have understood gender roles and identities beyond the male-female binary. In modern terms, sex refers to a person's biological attributes, while gender refers to roles, behaviors, and identities that a society assigns. These categories are fluid and can vary across cultures and time. Applying today's definitions to prehistoric people must be done with care, but findings do suggest that gender diversity has long been part of the human experience. One of the earliest archaeological hints of gender variance comes from a burial in the Czech Republic dating to approximately 5000 BCE, belonging to the Corded Ware culture. This grave contained the skeleton of a biologically male individual, but the burial followed feminine customs. The body was placed on its left side, with the head facing west, a style traditionally reserved for women in that culture. Items placed in the grave were also considered feminine, such as domestic jugs rather than weapons or tools. Czech archaeologist Kamila Remishova-Věšínová, who led the excavation, stated, "From history and ethnology, we know that burials reflect not only biological sex but also gender identity." This discovery led some researchers to suggest that this person may have been gender non-conforming or transgender in their community. However, scientists caution against firm conclusions, as interpretations are limited by the small sample size and lack of written context. Another important case is the Suontaka grave in Hattila, Finland, dated to around 1050 CE. Originally thought to be the grave of a high-status woman due to the presence of two swords, including one with a bronze hilt and feminine clothing, further analysis added complexity. In 2021, researchers from the University of Helsinki conducted ancient DNA testing and found the individual had XXY chromosomes, a condition known as Klinefelter syndrome. This genetic variation can result in physical traits that blend male and female characteristics. The grave contained both masculine and feminine objects, suggesting that this person may have held a non-binary or transgender identity within their society, or at least one that was socially accepted and honored. Such findings indicate that prehistoric and early societies might have recognized more than two genders, or at least accommodated individuals who lived outside the binary. But without direct testimonies, researchers remain cautious about over-interpreting these rare cases. While prehistoric evidence is limited, anthropologists studying indigenous and tribal societies that survived into modern times provide insight into long-standing patterns of gender diversity. Among many Native American tribes, individuals known as two-spirit people have long been recognized. This term refers to people who embody both masculine and feminine traits, and they often served as healers, teachers, artists, or spiritual leaders. The Zuni tribe, for example, honors Lamana, a male-bodied person who adopted a feminine role and was highly respected within the community. In South Asia, the Hijra community has existed for centuries, with documentation going back to the Mughal Empire. Though often marginalized in modern times, Hijras historically held important roles in rituals, blessings, and court ceremonies. Similarly, the Fa'afafine of Samoa and the Sworn Virgins of the Balkans demonstrate cultural traditions that accept or institutionalize third-gender roles. These are not prehistoric examples, but they suggest that recognition of gender variance is not new or Western, but rather a global human phenomenon with deep roots. When archaeologists examine cave paintings, carvings, and figurines from prehistoric times, some researchers propose that gender-fluid or androgynous imagery may have existed. For instance, in some prehistoric Venus figurines, the exaggerated features make it hard to determine specific gender markers. These figurines, dating back to around 30 BCE, are often interpreted as fertility symbols, but some may also reflect complex gender ideas. Another important area of research focuses on prehistoric shamanism. Shamans were believed to mediate between the human and spiritual world, and in some indigenous cultures, gender-variant individuals were often chosen for these roles. Some anthropologists suggest that shamans in Upper Paleolithic societies might have included gender-diverse individuals as their dual nature was considered powerful or mystical. A 1997 paper by Walter L. Williams, an anthropologist who studied gender-variant shamans in Eurasian traditions, argues that gender nonconformity was often linked with ritual status rather than exclusion. Looking at the daily life of prehistoric people, especially during the hunter-gatherer period, it is clear that gender roles were likely more flexible. Tasks such as hunting, gathering, tool-making, or caring for children were not always rigidly divided by sex. Archaeologist Lorna Tilley, who has studied caregiving in prehistoric societies, points out that survival often required cooperation and adaptability, meaning that skills mattered more than gender expectations. For example, evidence from early Mesolithic camps in Europe and Africa suggests that both men and women participated in hunting and foraging, depending on the needs of the group. This flexible system may have made space for individuals who didn't conform to binary gender roles. It wasn't until the agricultural revolution, roughly around 10,000 years ago, that societies began forming patriarchal structures, where property, inheritance, and labor became tied to biological sex roles. As humans moved into agriculture-based civilizations, gender roles became more rigid. With land ownership, heredity, and social hierarchies, societies increasingly placed men in dominant roles and restricted women and gender-variant individuals. This shift may have led to the marginalization of transgender and non-binary people in many regions. The rise of organized religion and legal systems also contributed to enforcing binary gender norms, often penalizing or excluding those who deviated from them. However, in earlier times, especially in small, mobile communities, cooperation and survival outweighed strict social codes. This might explain why evidence suggests a greater level of tolerance or social integration for gender non-conforming people in prehistoric settings compared to some later historical periods. Despite these findings, researchers emphasize the limitations of interpreting ancient gender identities. The absence of direct written records means that all interpretations must rely on context, burial customs, material culture, and in some cases, DNA testing. Archaeologists and anthropologists have to avoid projecting modern identities or politics onto ancient people. What appears to be evidence of transgender identity may have had different cultural meanings at the time. As noted by Dr. Ulla Moilanen, one of the researchers involved in the Suontaka study, the Suontaka grave forces us to consider that past people might have had ways of understanding gender that we do not yet comprehend. In recent years, advances in ancient DNA analysis have made it possible to revisit old graves with new tools. This can help clarify chromosomal makeup, genetic diseases, or population origins, contributing to more accurate reconstructions of individual identities in prehistoric societies. Ultimately, while there is no definitive evidence of a transgender identity in prehistoric times as defined today, the archaeological, anthropological, and genetic data suggest that gender diversity existed and was likely integrated into early human societies in various ways. The burial styles, artifacts, and social roles associated with certain individuals point to a broader understanding of gender than rigid binaries. These findings indicate that gender variance may have always been part of human existence, shaped by the environment, spiritual beliefs, and survival strategies. Prehistoric people may have approached gender with flexibility, assigning roles not based strictly on biological sex but on skills, responsibilities, and spiritual functions. By studying these early patterns, researchers continue to uncover how gender roles evolved and how modern societies might learn from the complex and diverse past of human identity.